One of the more confusing things about making an old style cast net is what in the world is a widener and where does it go? Well, a widener is basically a way of putting in an extra mesh in certain rows of the net where the net will begin to spread out rather than just be a tube. In other words, when I start a net, this net I'm working on now, I used 42 starting mesh with 14 wideners. On the fourth row down, that was my first widener row, I knitted one mesh, put a widener in, counted 3, put another widener in, 3 more, another widener till I had 14 wideners all the way around the net. Every second row, not mesh, but every second row will be standard mesh. The third row will be another widener row. So you're going to have a widener row, a row with nothing but standard mesh, another row with nothing but standard mesh, and then another widener row. And again, you would have 14 widener rows, but on the second widener row, instead of having 3 in between like you originally put, you'll have 4 mesh in between the wideners. And you'll notice that each widener will come directly below the next one in the net. In other words, when you open the net up after it's built, it'll look like you have 14 pieces of pie because those wideners will show differently in the mesh than the other mesh of the net. All right, all a widener is a loop. In other words, right now I am on my next knot will be a widener. What I will do is I'll come up right here above my gauge where the 2 mesh form the bar, right at that intersection. I'll pull my line through and down. It'll make a loop. It's a loop, just a standard loop. The first thing I'll do is I'll put a half hitch in that loop and pull it down to the gauge. Okay, now anytime you put a half hitch or any knot that goes around a side of the string, that knot will have a tendency to slip. To make it a little harder for this knot to slip, what I do is tie a double hitch, which is basically you throw your loop around. This is what's called the standard net knot in other terms, but what it actually is double hitch here. You'll come through between the loop you just created and that mesh next to it to the left. You'll pull it a little bit and then come back through again. So that's actually putting 2 loops on the string before you tighten it. Then you just tighten it down on top of that first half hitch, and you have a total of 3 hitches, which will make that loop stay better. Now, if you put a lot of pressure pulling up on it, it will release and it will slide up, and it won't influence whether or not you can make a net, but it will cause the net to have one wider mesh than it should have. All right, this particular row I'm working on has 11 mesh in it between the wideners. Here's where I widened the row, and then I've got 11, and you see I have another widener right here, and then the one I just put in was on the 11th mesh in that net, past the widener before it. Now, if you see here, if you look right up here where I'm pointing with my gauge, you'll see there's another widener. If you look above that one, there's another widener right here. So you got 1, 2, 3 going down the net as you progressed. And if you notice, you've got 2 standard rows between it to make a mesh between. Okay. Then what you will do, you'll tie 11 more knots past that widener. All right, now this should be my 9th knot, which would leave me 2 more to go before I do my widener. But I always stop and check it, because the one thing you do not want to do is forget that widener or go past it. Otherwise, you're going to have to come back and cut your net out and patch it. But anyway, that's my 9th knot I counted, so I've got 2 more to make 11. There's the 2 mesh for that. I always try to take my time on a widener row. You don't want to go all out, or you're going to skip wideners and mess up. You want to count it and make sure that the count is accurate and that each widener is falling directly below the one above it. All right, so here's your widener above it. Right here, it's next to where I had to splice in some line, but you can see it. There it is, the widener. What I'm going to do is come right in here with my needle, bring it down onto the gauge, pinch it tight with my thumb and my index finger, run that needle through and tighten that down to a hitch. All right, then I'm going to do a double hitch, make that loop, come through, bring it down, come through one more time, bring it down, and there you go. There's your widener. And like I say, it's just a loop, but what it's actually done is it's created this mesh right here so that I've got an extra mesh where one time I had 1, I now have 2. And then of course you just keep going. And 11 more mesh from here, I would put another widener, and so on, till I get to the point where I put the net together to make the circle, bring down the knots, and start back on another row, and that row would not have wideners. The next row would not have wideners. Then a widener row. Then a row with no wideners, row with no wideners, widener row. If you want to calculate how many mesh you have in a net, you take the number of widener rows that you've come down. In other words, I've come down 11 widener rows, so if I wanted to calculate how many mesh is in this row, I'd say 11 times 14 plus 14, because there's 11 wideners in here, and whatever that came up on my calculator, that's how many I would have. And for instance, this is 1-inch mesh, 2-inch stretch. When you get down 28 wideners, you should have 448 mesh in a row. That's at 8 foot. If you're making an 8 foot radius or hanging net. Okay, I hope that helped clear up any confusion about wideners. Like I said, now you can start a widener row wherever you think you would like to start it. If you want to come down 6 or 7 rows before you start your widener row, just to have a little less mesh up at the top, you can do that. However, if you start, I've always found if I start on the 4th row from my starting row, if that's my first widener row is the first row, then that net will, when it's spread, will spread nice and even and flat on the ground and not have any witches' hats or any type of bulk right around the horn. Okay, thank you.